What if the old stories were true, and one night, something came for you? In quiet towns and deep forests, people have gone missing or come back terrified. From a police officer's last shift to a biker's final ride, these events don't make sense. Witnesses speak of huge shapes, glowing eyes, and creatures no animal could match. Officials blame bears or stress, but the tracks left behind tell another story. On the night of October 19, 2012, in Lewis County, Washington, the roads were empty and the forest air felt unusually still. Deputy Alan Reese was alone in his patrol car, making a final check through the backwoods before heading in for the night. The road he traveled was narrow, cracked, and surrounded by deep trees on both sides. This was a rural service road near a place locals called Cinderbrush Hollow, a dense wooded area that many avoided after dark. Alan was a 41-year-old deputy with over 16 years of service in the county. He was known for being steady, respectful, and rarely shaken. He had once served in the U.S. Army before returning home to take care of his aging parents and joining the sheriff's department. Over the years, he earned several awards for bravery and helped in search and rescue operations deep in the wilderness. Many saw him as a calm protector, someone who never panicked even during the toughest calls. That evening, Alan had decided to check out the Cinderbrush Hollow area one last time. There had been reports of strange noises and missing livestock from nearby properties, and although most officers brushed it off as coyotes or bears, Alan believed in being thorough. As he drove deeper into the woods, the patrol car's headlights lit up the thick brush and towering trees ahead. Suddenly, just around a bend, Alan hit the brakes hard. Standing directly in the beam of his headlights was a huge, upright figure. It was covered in dark, matted hair from head to toe. The creature stood nearly 9 feet tall, its arms long and low, and its chest wide like a barrel. For a brief moment, both man and beast stayed frozen in place. Alan slowly opened the driver's side door and stepped out, unsure of what he was looking at. Just as he placed one foot on the gravel road, the creature moved. Without a sound, it picked up a large dead tree limb, thicker than Alan's torso, and with shocking force it threw it straight at the patrol car. The tree crashed over the hood, smashing the windshield and twisting the front frame. Alan barely avoided being crushed. The tree landed where he had been just seconds earlier. Though not physically hurt, he was overcome by a sudden wave of nausea as the air filled with a strange metallic smell, sharp like burnt iron. The trees behind the creature seemed to shift unnaturally, casting odd shadows in all directions. His body locked up before instinct pulled him back. He turned and ran into the driver's seat, started the damaged vehicle, and drove away without looking back. The strange odor lingered inside the car. Alan didn't stop until he reached the edge of the county, his hands trembling on the wheel. When Alan reached the county line, he did not drive home. He parked the damaged car behind a quiet gas station near an old rail crossing. The hood still steamed, and the cracked windshield reflected pale gray light from a nearby street lamp. Alan sat still for a long time, not moving, not speaking. The air outside remained dry, but his shirt clung to him with sweat. When the sun rose over Lewis County the next morning, Alan walked into the sheriff's office and handed over his badge. His resignation was short. He wrote that he could no longer carry out his duties due to stress. He did not take any time to speak with his colleague. His face looked pale and tired. He placed the badge on the desk, nodded, and left without waiting for questions. Back at his small house on the town's edge, Alan gathered his things quietly. He kept his blinds shut and did not answer the door when neighbors came to check on him. A few noticed the strange marks on the patrol vehicle, which had been left in the garage behind the station. The metal hood had been dented in a way that did not look like any crash they had seen. There were no tree splinters or bark stuck to the edge. Instead, the damage looked like it had been made by something uneven, wide, and heavy. Some officers whispered about it but said nothing to the press. One rookie deputy saw the front of the vehicle up close and noticed strange shapes along the side panel. Scars too high for a bear, too wide for claws. The report officially said the impact, caused by a falling branch. But the patterns were wrong. They had no clear origin. Alan made no effort to explain what happened. To those closest to him, he only said the woods had changed. He never called it a creature. He never called it a person. He simply said he did not feel safe anymore. Not in the forest, not on the road. Some who had worked with him on search and rescue trips said he had once tracked cougars and survived river crossings. He was not easily scared. But after that night, something in him had shifted. 3 days after his resignation, Alan sold his truck and closed his accounts. He left Lewis County and did not leave a forwarding address. Some believed he moved to a smaller town near the Oregon border. Others said he rented a cabin far from any wooded areas. Wherever he went, he made sure to avoid anything that looked like Cinderbrush Hollow. The sheriff's office never reopened the case. The patrol car was sent for repairs, though the mechanic made a note about the strange indentations on the front frame. Wildlife officers said the incident was likely caused by a large animal. They called it a rare case of night aggression, maybe due to sickness or hunger. No other investigation followed. The area near Cinderbrush Hollow stayed quiet. Locals spoke less about the woods. A few hunters claimed to hear odd thuds in the distance at night. One man who lived near the edge of the hollow said his dogs stopped walking the trail completely. They would stand still at the entrance and growl. Though Alan was gone, his story lingered. It spread between officers, between families, between hunters. Some called it nonsense. Others said it made sense of things they had always feared but never admitted. The forest had always been dark, but now, for some, it was something else, something watching from between the trees. On April 6, 2008, in Boone County, Arkansas, the weather was cool and calm as Travis Ballard set out to explore the local trail. This long path weaved through open woodlands not far from the county border. The trail had no gates or fees. It was a public access area that hikers and campers often used for day trips or short camping adventures. Though not heavily patrolled, it was well known among locals. Travis was 29 years old and lived in a small town nearby. He worked as a mechanic, fixing trucks and motorcycles for people across the county. On weekends, he liked to escape into nature. Hiking helped him stay focused and calm. Friends described him as peaceful and smart, always carrying a notebook to track what he saw in the wild. He had grown up exploring the hills and trails in the Ozark region and was confident outdoors. He sometimes brought a small field knife, a simple compass, and a thermal blanket, things he considered just smart to carry. He left early that Sunday morning with plans to stay one night. He packed light, just a tent, water, a small stove, and food. He told his neighbor he would return the next day. The Ridgeland Trail stretched for miles, and Travis planned to hike into a quiet spot, far from the road, where he had camped once before. Travis followed the trail for most of the day. As the sun began to drop behind the trees, he set up camp near a cluster of boulders. The spot was open, with a clear view of the sky. He cooked a small meal and took notes in his book about the birds and tracks he had seen along the way. As night came, the air shifted, the wind turned still, and the insects grew quiet. A faint scent, like wet leaves mixed with iron, lingered around the trees. Later that night, something disturbed the quiet. Small branches snapped in the distance. At first it sounded like a deer, but then the noise grew louder and closer. Heavy footsteps, not in pairs, but single and spaced far apart. Something large was walking near his camp. The sound moved quickly through the woods, crunching the leaf-covered ground with each step. Travis stepped out of his tent with his flashlight. The beam of light only reached so far, and the trees swallowed the edges. More branches broke, and a deep rustling moved through the brush. Then there was stillness. The woods didn't move. Even the air held still. He turned his light toward the trail and froze. At the edge of the light stood something tall. The shape was wide and upright. The head nearly reached the lowest tree limbs. It stood unmoving, then vanished into the darkness. Travis backed into his tent, zipped it closed, and turned off the light. That was the last anyone heard from him. The next morning, Travis did not return. His truck was found in the parking area where the trail began. Volunteers, family, and county search teams began to look for him that afternoon, unsure of what they might find in the woods. The search teams reached the area where Travis had planned to camp. They spread out in lines, calling his name and moving slowly between trees and bushes. After several hours, one group came across torn pieces of fabric. It looked like the top half of a sleeping bag. A few feet away, they found a small metal pot, bent in the middle, as if something had stepped on it. More items appeared nearby: a flashlight, a notebook, and the frame of a backpack. All of it was damaged. Then they found the tent, ripped down one side. Drag marks were visible in the dirt, deep and long. And farther up the trail, prints began to appear. Barefoot impressions, deep and wide, leading away into thick trees. Further ahead, the searchers found the tent, torn open from one side. Its fabric had long rips that stretched nearly from top to bottom. Around the campsite, everything was disturbed. Branches were snapped, and the soft ground showed signs of something being dragged. The area no longer smelled like forest. It carried a strong odor, like rust and something old. One searcher followed long marks that trailed into the brush. They led toward a ridge. The prints they saw were strange. These were not left by shoes or boots. Each one was wider than a man's foot, pressed deep into the earth, and spaced farther than normal steps. There were no claw marks, but deep curves showed pressure. The searchers followed them until they ended near a steep drop, where a creek flowed slowly at the bottom. Trees near the ridge had broken limbs, some more than 10 feet above the ground. Bark was missing, as though something had scraped or leaned hard against it. They found no body, no blood nearby, and no trail returning. Helicopters scanned the ridge from above. Search dogs were brought in and led teams down the slope, but they could not pick up a scent past a certain line in the woods. The trail went cold without a reason. Despite the damage, the missing hiker remained unaccounted for. Travis was never found. Officials later gave a public update. They said the likely cause was a fall or an encounter with wildlife. They mentioned the creek below the ridge and suggested that he might have slipped or been startled by a wild animal. No official word was given about the strange prints or the tree damage. In town, people started talking more about that trail. Some said it had always felt strange. Others said there had been old stories about shadows in the trees or shapes that watched from high places. One older man remembered hearing something once while camping, a noise that shifted between two notes, like a cry that changed its mind halfway through. A few stopped visiting that part of the woods after sunset. Months later, a wooden sign was placed at the start of the trail. It warned hikers to stay on marked paths and not to camp alone. But by then, many had already changed their routes. The area around the ridge grew quiet. Each April, Travis's family returned. They placed flowers near the trail's start and tied a ribbon around a tree. They said he was someone who knew how to survive outdoors. But what happened that night was not something anyone could prepare for. They never recovered his body, but they knew something had taken him. It left no prints returning, no broken gear beyond the tent, and no answer. And whatever it was, it walked deep into the woods and never looked back. On January 12, 1994, in Inverness Shire, Scotland, the morning was cold and gray. The hills outside town were covered in frost, and pale clouds floated above the empty fields. Robert Gray was already behind the wheel of his mail van. He had driven this same route northeast of Braemar Hollow for 15 years. The roads were narrow, old, and wound through quiet farmland where houses stood far apart. Robert was 57 years old. He had worked in shipping before joining the Postal Service. Years earlier, he had worked in a lighthouse along the coast. People who knew him said he was quiet and steady. He liked the job because it gave him space. Every day, he drove along small roads that curved between old trees, stone walls, and sheep pastures. He had no family nearby, but he waved to children at farm gates and spoke kindly to older residents. That morning, the van moved slowly along a frozen lane. The air felt heavier than normal. A low mist hung over the fields, and the hedges beside the road held small patches of ice. As Robert climbed a hill between two walls, he noticed something shift along the trees on his left. It was quick and wide. He slowed but saw nothing more. A few minutes later, he turned onto a rough road that led to the last stop on his route. There were no homes in sight, just old fences, bare trees, and empty pasture. Then something struck the side of the van. The whole vehicle rocked. Robert grabbed the wheel and held tight as the tires bumped the edge of the road. The side door rattled hard, like something had scraped across it. He looked in the mirror but saw only fog behind him. He rolled the window down slightly. The air outside smelled damp and bitter, like old leaves that had burned. There were no birds and no wind. The sky above looked dull, but it did not feel like weather. It felt like something else. Then the roof shifted with a heavy thump. The van dipped slightly under the weight. Nails or claws scratched across the top in a slow line. Robert pressed the gas and the van jolted forward. The sound stopped, as if whatever had been there jumped away. He did not slow down again until reaching the next house. When he got out, he checked the van carefully. The left side had long, deep scratches that peeled through the paint and into the metal. The roof had dents the size of fists. Leaves, dark mud, and small bits of bark were stuck in the dents. Robert finished the rest of the route that day, but something had changed. He felt stiff and uneasy. The road seemed longer, and he kept checking the mirrors. That night, he sat alone in his small house near the edge of town. The lights were on, but the rooms felt colder than usual. He had parked the van at the depot and said nothing to anyone. When a coworker asked if the van was working fine, Robert nodded. He said little, and no one pressed him. He sat for hours without turning on the television. He did not eat much that night. He just sat and looked out the window toward the road. And deep inside, he knew that something was still out there. The next morning, Robert brought the van in for inspection. The scratches were deeper than they first looked. Mechanics found 3 dents on the roof, each wide and rounded, like something heavy had dropped down hard. The left side panel had 5 claw-like grooves that ran in a crooked path. Paint had been pulled off in long strips. Mud and crushed twigs were stuck along the edges. They wrote the report without giving a clear cause. Wildlife officers were called to take a look. One suggested a large stag might have struck the vehicle, but stags did not land on roofs. There were no signs of antlers or broken glass. The brakes and tires worked perfectly. The wheel alignment was normal. The damage made no sense. Robert did not offer much. He nodded through the questions and signed the form without speaking more than a few words. Then he walked away and finished the route with a different van. He did not take the old road again. That night he went home early and sat in silence. He wrote a letter and folded it neatly. He placed it inside a drawer and locked it. Then he turned off the lights and lay in bed without sleeping. The cold felt stronger than before, and the house creaked in places it never had. Within 2 weeks, Robert gave notice. He told the post office he was retiring and moving south. There was no farewell lunch or gathering. He packed his things and left without saying goodbye to any of the houses along his route. His home was cleared out quietly. Some said he went to stay near family. Others believed he simply wanted to be far away. The old van was repaired and put back into service, but drivers avoided it. They said it had a bad feeling. One man refused to take it more than once. He said the mirrors seemed to shift on their own, like something was behind him even when the road was empty. In Braemar Hollow, people started talking. Some remembered stories told long ago. They spoke of large figures in the fields, moving quickly across frost-covered ground. A few older farmers said they had heard strange, heavy steps in the early hours. Others had seen trees with high claw marks, far above any deer or livestock. The route Robert once drove became quieter. Some farmers started fencing their land more tightly. Others moved their animals closer to the barn at night. Hikers began avoiding the side paths and walking only during daylight. It was as if the land itself had changed. Robert never contacted anyone from the area again. His name faded from town except in quiet talk. A few believed he had seen something real. Others said it was just age or stress. But the narrow road that runs past Braemar Hollow is still there. And sometimes, when the mist hangs low, drivers say they feel watched. Something waits in the hedges, something that never fully left. On July 14, 1987, in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, the woods near Bracken Mill Hollow were thick with summer heat and wet air. Two amateur botanists, Mark Talbot and Evan Price, stepped off a narrow trail into a lesser-known stretch of lowland forest. They were not professionals, but both enjoyed finding rare plants in quiet places where few people walked. Mark was 32, tall and steady, with a calm nature. He worked as a science teacher at a local school and spent summers exploring trails. Evan, a few years younger, ran a small plant nursery nearby. He carried a worn guidebook and had a strong memory for Latin names. They met at a plant fair and quickly became friends through shared trips into the wild. That morning they left early, carrying only water, a notebook, a camera, and a few tools. The plan was simple: reach the far side of the woods, document samples, then return before nightfall. The trail they followed had not been used in years. They liked it that way. Old places meant less disturbance and more chances to find rare species that others had missed. By midday, they were deep in the forest. The ground was soft under their boots, and tangled roots crisscrossed the path. The air grew thick and still, and the smell of damp moss grew stronger. They moved slowly, stopping to check mushrooms and strange leaves. The forest around them seemed too heavy, as if the air itself had changed. Pushing through tall ferns, they reached a clearing. Light passed through gaps in the canopy, falling in long yellow lines. The trees around the edge looked damaged. Some bark had strange gouges that looked new. Mark took a few photos while Evan moved toward the tree line, pointing at a plant by a broken trunk. Something did not feel right, but they stayed focused. Then came the first, a single snap, loud and close. A second one followed, deeper and quicker. Something large was moving behind the trees. The footsteps were solid, close to the ground and fast. Not like a deer, not like a bear, something heavier. The soil seemed to shift with each step, and the ferns rippled as if brushed by wind, though the trees did not sway. They turned to run, but in their panic, they split directions. Mark veered left. Evan rushed straight ahead. Behind them, something moved through the underbrush. It came fast, crashing through branches with ease. Evan lost his bag as he pushed through a wall of vines. His arms were scratched, and sweat poured down his face. He slipped at the edge of a ridge and fell, sliding down a wet slope. He landed in shallow water, covered in mud and small cuts. For a moment he lay there, heart racing, listening. Nothing followed. There was only the sound of water moving around stones and a sharp, dry smell in the air. Evan stood, shaking, and looked back toward the ridge. The clearing was no longer visible. Evan Price walked for nearly an hour before he reached a gravel road. His legs were weak, and his clothes were soaked with sweat and mud. A farmer found him not far from the gate, stumbling and unable to speak clearly. He was brought to the nearest clinic, where nurses cleaned his arms and wrapped them in gauze. His eyes remained fixed on the wall, and he kept repeating the same few broken phrases that no one understood. The police were called, and soon a search began. Evan, still in shock, gave them what information he could. He described where they had entered the forest and mentioned a clearing with damaged trees. A rough map was drawn based on his direction and timing. It was not exact, but enough for officials to begin searching. That evening, teams entered the woods with flashlights and dogs. They followed the directions carefully, watching for anything that might lead them to Mark. The forest looked calm on the surface, but the searchers quickly noticed unusual signs. Saplings were snapped at odd angles, and claw marks ran across the trunks of trees at shoulder height. In some places, the ground was torn and soft, as if something had passed through with great force. They reached the clearing late that night. It looked quiet but strange. The soil had shallow holes, and some tree bark had been ripped away completely. A few pieces of Mark's gear were found near the edge: his camera, a broken field tool, and a notebook lying open in the dirt. Evan's torn bag was nearby, emptied and covered in scratches. No body was found, but the dogs reacted strongly to a patch of earth by a group of mossy stones. The scent trail ended there. The dogs refused to continue. Some backed away, tails lowered. The handler said it was not a normal reaction. It felt wrong, like something else had been in the area recently. The case was handled by local wildlife officers. They suggested a bear had startled the two men, causing them to run in different directions. They said fear and confusion led to Evan's injuries, and that Mark had likely been caught in a fall or by a wild animal. But there were no animal prints, no blood trail, and no teeth marks on any of the gear. The official report ruled it a likely animal encounter, but several details were left out. The claw marks were too wide, the trees were damaged too high off the ground, and one ranger quietly noted that the drag marks near the clearing stopped without sign of a body. Evan moved away from Tioga County a few weeks later. He did not return to the woods and stopped speaking to the press. A short note was left with Mark's family, expressing sorrow and saying he had tried to run fast enough for both of them. The forest near Bracken Mill Hollow remains still, but some believe it remembers. On October 3, 2005, in Ceredigion County, Wales, the trails near the Vale of Tyrwin were damp from morning mist. A solo mountain biker named Callum Hughes pedaled along the riverside paths, planning to complete a 20-mile route before lunch. He had taken the day off from his job as a travel photographer, choosing to spend it away from screens and city noise. Callum was 35 years old. He had grown up near Lampeter and knew these woods well. In his youth, he had walked them with his grandfather, learning every dip and turn along the river's edge. As an adult, he returned often to cycle for long stretches, sometimes in silence, other times with a camera strapped to his back. He had recently finished a trip to Portugal and was preparing another series of photos for a travel magazine. But this morning was for himself. He left home early, brought only a water bottle, a phone, and some trail mix. His bike was in top shape, its tires gripping the slick earth without trouble. The Vale of Tyrwin was beautiful in early October. Brown leaves curled under tall branches, and soft wind passed through the undergrowth. Callum followed a narrow dirt trail that moved along the riverbank, then dipped into thicker brush. He planned to reach a small clearing halfway through the ride, take a short break, then loop back along the upper ridge. As he entered the deeper section of the trail, the surroundings shifted. The light became uneven, and the trees seemed to lean closer together. There was a sudden drop in temperature. A strange burnt wood scent drifted in the air. The birds that had chirped earlier were now quiet. The river's flow was the only sound. Callum slowed his pace, scanning both sides of the trail. He came around a bend where the trees grew close together. Ahead, the path twisted sharply, and thick bramble hugged the corners. As he steered through the curve, something echoed behind him. It was not clear at first. Then came a deep, low sound, not a growl or cry, but something rough, like a roar pushed through layers of trees. He turned his head, trying to look back without stopping. Then the noise came again, louder this time. It filled the air and something large moved in the woods behind him. Callum pushed the pedals harder, trying to gain speed. Branches snapped. Heavy steps pounded the ground somewhere just beyond the brush. He stood on the pedals and raced forward. At the edge of the trail, near a sharp drop to the water below, something crashed out from the trees. Callum veered right, trying to avoid it. His front tire hit a rock and he flew forward, tumbling down the slope. His bike twisted behind him and landed in the bramble. The forest grew still again. When hikers passed the area later that morning, they found torn gear scattered on the ground, drag marks in the mud, and a strange quiet pressing down on the trail. The pair who came through shortly after noon was an older couple visiting from a nearby village. They had taken the same path along the river, planning to stop near the overlook. As they rounded the bend, they noticed something unusual in the dirt. Bicycle tire tracks curved sharply into the grass, ending near the slope. A few feet away, they spotted a broken helmet strap and torn pieces of a backpack. They followed the trail down the slope and reached the thick bramble. Inside the dense growth, they found more pieces of gear. The mountain bike was twisted, one wheel bent out of shape. The ground was churned and uneven. Drag marks cut through the mud, moving from the trail into the underbrush. There was blood on the roots and dark smears across the fallen leaves. They did not find the rider. Callum Hughes was missing, and what remained behind told a story no one could explain. Local authorities arrived within the hour. They sealed the trail and placed temporary markers. Teams moved in from both sides, searching the surrounding brush and tracing the river's edge. A trained search unit was called, including dogs and tracking experts. They followed the disturbed ground for almost 40 meters before the signs vanished altogether. The drag marks ended where thick vines and jagged stone blocked the way. No footprints, no clothing, no broken branches led beyond it. But just past the vines, trackers noticed something odd. Pressed deep into the soft mud were large five-toed impressions. Each was nearly twice the size of a human foot. The stride between them was long and measured. The marks continued briefly across the slope and then disappeared on firmer ground. Officials stated the most likely cause was an encounter with a wild animal. They suggested that a rogue boar or another large creature had surprised Callum, causing the crash and subsequent injury. But several searchers disagreed. The tracks were too symmetrical and clean. No hoof marks, no fur or scat were recovered. The drag marks suggested deliberate force. What happened to Callum remained unclear. His body was never recovered. Blood at the site matched his DNA, but no trail led away. His gear was broken but not scattered like it would be in a fall. The forest provided no answers. The story began to spread. Regional papers printed vague headlines. Officials issued general warnings. Wildlife experts chose their words carefully, but local residents talked in quieter ways. Some recalled old stories passed down in the area, tales of shapes near the riverbanks, heavy noises before dawn, or paths that seemed to shift beneath the trees. What once felt like stories began to sound like something else. In time, warning signs were placed along the section of trail near the upper bend. Visitors were told to stay on marked paths and avoid the river's edge after dark. The area was not closed, but hikers began choosing other trails. The water still flows past the thick growth and the trees remain, but the place where the bike was found feels changed. There are no new sounds there, just stillness, and the faint memory of something that moved without a name. On December 21st, 2017, in Flathead County, Montana, the air was cold and thick with snow. The hills along the back roads were quiet beneath a sky full of heavy clouds. It was just past midnight when Ray Dalton drove his semi-truck down Ravenspine Hollow Road, a narrow stretch lined with pine trees and frozen ditches. Ray was 52 years old and had worked as a long-haul driver since his 20s. He had traveled across every state in the country. People said he was reliable, calm, and never afraid of dark routes. He often accepted jobs others turned down. He liked the steady movement of the road and the sound of the engine in the dark. That night, Ray was hauling a shipment of household goods from Spokane to a warehouse near Kalispell. His route took him through quieter county roads to avoid ice on the main highways. He had used this way before, but not during a storm. Snow had started falling earlier in the evening, and now the road looked like a white ribbon stretched between the trees. Ray drove slowly, the headlights catching flakes that twisted in the wind. His hand stayed firm on the wheel. About 20 miles into the wooded road, the radio gave a sharp crackle, then went dead. He tapped the speaker, then tried the music, but the system stayed silent. The cab lights dimmed slightly, then returned. A strange pop in the air made his ears feel blocked. He kept going. Then something moved fast across the road. It was dark, low to the ground, and gone in seconds. He slowed, but did not stop. Maybe a deer or a dog. But in the side mirror, he noticed something else. A tall shape crossed the snowbank behind the trailer and vanished into the trees. Ray pressed the pedal harder. The engine groaned as the truck climbed a hill. The road dipped again and the pines grew tighter. A sudden blow struck the back of the trailer. Metal jolted. The rig shifted. He looked again. Nothing but snow behind him. Another hit came, this time from the left. The trailer rocked. The sound rang through the body of the truck. Then came something sharper, a series of scraping noises like nails dragging across metal. Ray kept moving. His eyes stayed on the path. The cab rattled. The mirrors shook. He could feel something pressing through the side frame. Then came a final crash, loud and heavy. The roof above him dipped for a moment. Something had landed, paused, then slid off the top. He drove faster. The air in the cab turned icy. His fingers tingled. The road vanished into swirling white ahead. Somewhere behind him, the woods closed in. By the time he saw lights from a rest stop, the dashboard flickered again. He did not slow down. Ray Dalton pulled into the snowy rest stop without turning off the engine. He left the headlights on, opened the door, and stepped barefoot onto the cold pavement. His boots were still inside the cab, untouched. His coat hung open, and the wind pushed at his clothes. He walked slowly across the lot, not looking back, leaving light footprints behind him. A store clerk inside saw him moving strangely and called for help. Police arrived minutes later. They found Ray seated on a snow-covered bench behind the building, his hands pressed to his face. His skin was pale, and his eyes were wide. He did not speak clearly, only pointed behind him, shaking his head. Emergency responders helped him into a warm vehicle. A quick check showed no injuries, only signs of cold exposure and deep confusion. Doctors later said his condition came from shock, not any visible trauma. Officers drove back to the spot where Ray had left the truck. The vehicle was still idling along the edge of Ravenspine Hollow Road. The trailer doors were closed, the mirrors frosted over, and the cab windows fogged. But something about the truck looked off. The trailer's metal shell had several large dents. Wide marks ran along the side as if scraped by something strong. The back panel had curved impressions that bent the steel inward. The roof of the cab showed a deep impact. Pine needles were stuck in the dents. Dried dirt and bits of bark clung to the edges. An officer walked around the back and noticed something odd in the snow. There was a single footprint behind the trailer. It had 5 clear toe shapes and was over twice the length of a man's boot. The heel was wide and sunk deep. No other tracks were nearby. No sign of paws, boots, or tire treads off-road. Wildlife officials arrived later that afternoon. They took pictures, examined the truck, and looked at the marks. They suggested a bear or large wildcat might have followed the truck and struck it. But the size and spacing of the marks raised doubts. The shape of the footprint was not like anything known in the region. There were no claw marks, no fur, and no droppings found. The snow showed no signs of typical animal movement. Ray stayed at a motel in Kalispell for 2 nights, paid for by the shipping company. A company representative tried to speak with him, but he offered no answers. He left Montana the next week and moved back to Idaho. He sold his truck and gave up driving for good. Those who knew him said he was never the same. He avoided forested roads, refused long trips, and rarely spoke about what happened. The incident at Ravenspine Hollow Road became local talk for weeks. Some called it a weather-related scare. Others were not sure. People nearby said they had heard strange echoes at night, like steps too heavy for any known animal. Drivers now take longer routes, even if it means more time. The road remains open, but something unseen still watches from the trees.